Hey everybody, Jimmy Leff here with some more RC content. Today we're going to be talking about changing shock oil, so stick around. Oftentimes in competitive club racing, our shocks can often become fouled with dirt or can fill with air, and it can really make the shocks a little unpredictable. When you should change the oil, that's really up to the individual. It depends on what type of racing you're doing. Competitive club racers, they usually fall into three different categories. They're either one, they're changing it every day. I'll go out to the club race and I'll see them doing it there in the pits. There's two, which is the category that I fall under, which is about once every couple weeks, and I usually race 1 or 2 times a week. And then there's the guys that just never do it. Let's talk about some of the equipment we'll use before we get over to the pit bench and show you how to do this. One is get some type of degreaser. The popular one is Simple Green. That's the one that I'll be using. Use a mat or a towel, some type of nylon brush, which I'll show you in the video, as well as a paintbrush. Is very helpful for sweeping off all that excess dirt before you get started. All kinds of different shock stands out there. Some of them are easily made, and I'll show you how I made mine and what I think works best for me, and then also other examples of what's out there. Of course, you need your shock oil and your shock tools. Whether that's the kit tools or the aftermarket tools, that's up to you, but we'll talk about those as well. So we have the essential tools and equipment in order to do this job, starting out with our shocks that were removed from a TLR 22 5.0 buggy. That's the buggy I race, and so that's the one we'll be working on. Have the kit tools that came with the kit to help take the shock caps off, and they're pretty handy. I haven't gone out and bought anything fancy, but they do the job, and they're small, so they take up less space. A 1.5 millimeter hex. Yours may be different, but for the TLR 5.0 buggy, the 1.5 millimeter will fit the top bleeder screw as well as the bottom shock cup, which is held on by a hex screw as well. Tools to help clean the shocks: the paintbrush and also the toothbrush to help clean the small grooves within the shocks to make them look nice, and also to clean off any excess oil that may get on them. If you get any excess oil on the shocks, you're going to know it because the dust is going to stick right to it. I'll be using these cups for my shock stands, and they're essentially 3-ounce bathroom cups, which I've reamed out a small hole in, and they work out nice for me because they will nest on one another, and you can make as many of them as you want. Have our degreaser, which using Simple Green. That seems to be the item of choice. It's pretty easy on the skin, and it does a good job with the silicone oil that we use within the shocks. So working on our shock here, the first thing we're going to do is remove the collar screw from the shock cup with our 1.5 millimeters. Hex wrench. And we'll remove the shock cup and the spring. What I like to do at this point is take our Simple Green and just spray those two things down and set them aside. If it's been a while and your shocks are fairly dirty, you're going to notice quite a bit of buildup there in the bottom of that shock cup. So you can, if you need to, use a Q-tip, douse it down with some Simple Green and wipe it out. So we get those nice and clean, and we'll go ahead and set those aside. Now the shock itself, typically where you're going to get the most buildup is right underneath here. This one's not too bad, but you can see a little buildup right along here. And you just take your brush here and just knock some of that off. Then also in these threads, if your shocks have these threaded shock collars, inside these threads are pretty fine. They can get some grit in there as well. I typically will knock it down with the brush first before I get the Simple Green on, otherwise we're just making mud. I found if you pre-clean prior to taking the cup off and getting oil everywhere, it just makes it easier for cleanup once you're done. So even getting any mud or dirt out of the bleeder screw as well, it's going to be a good idea to get this shock nice and clean prior to you taking the cap off. So now that we're pre-cleaned, we're going to take our 1.5 millimeter and we're going to just loosen up the bleeder cap screw, just so that we're not messing with it once we have the cap off. So I'll back it off just so that it's loose. I'll take my shock tool, or whatever shock tool you have. This one fits right up into the hex of the shock body. And I'll use, I don't know if this is a 3/32 hex wrench, it's just one of my thicker ones. And I'll use that to get a little leverage on it just to crack the tension off the top. Once that's done, I will remove the bleeder screw completely and set it aside. Just be sure if your bleeder screw has a washer on it that comes off as well. I can see that on there. It's a little copper piece, so I know that we're good there. Set that aside. Then I will hand turn the cap off of the shock. Make sure you're holding it upright. When you pull the shock cap off, there's going to be a small amount of oil in there, so just make sure you place it down in a way that it's not going to make a mess. Set it on a paper towel, what have you. Then take my cup that I'm going to dump my oil in and dump the oil out. It's not terrible. There's a little bit of dirt in there. I'll pump the oil out several times, get as much of it out of there as you can, and see the piston in there. I'll take a little paper towel or shop towel, whatever you have, and just clean out the top of it. This is where it becomes important for the pre-clean. When you're messing with the inside of the shock, if there's dirt, a lot of contaminants on the outside, that's going to be the opportunity to get in there. Now I'll take this out and I will place my shock inside the stand. Now I've got my shock oils out. Basic kit setup, pretty standard across the board at the track I race at anyways. 32.5 up front, 27.5 in the back. So I've got my shock and my shock oil ready to fill it. So we're going to fill it up. We're not going to go all the way to the top, we're just going to go just about there. That's going to give us an opportunity to move the piston up slowly. And as you move it up, you're going to see that oil rise, and that's why you're not going to fill it all the way to the top at first. You're going to pull it down, and you're going to see some air bubbles up there. So I'll slowly pull it up and pull it down a few times just to make sure I work all the air. If you're rebuilding the shock, you're going to see a lot more air because you're trying to get all the oil down into the inner O-rings. But here we're just changing it, so there's not going to be too much air. So once I see those air bubbles and I feel like I've got most of them worked into the oil, I will place it into my shock stand and set it aside. Alright, so we're back and our oil is looking pretty good. I'm not seeing any bubbles. Looks like they all rose to the top. So we are going to do our final top off. Now it's important when you're putting the oil in that you're not squeezing a bunch of air in it. You're just letting the oil drip onto the top of it. Just about to the point where the oil begins to mound over the top. At this point, you're going to take your shock cap, I will usually run it backwards until I hear it click, and then I know that I'm in my threads, and I will tighten it down. Hand tight at first, and tool goes back on, and you don't want to over tighten it because you'll cross thread, and then you're in trouble and you're buying a new shock cap. shock cap is on there nice and snug. At this point we're going to hold the shock at a 45-degree angle with the bleeder hole facing upwards and slowly move the piston up. I will clean the oil off as it comes out. Just to cut down on the mess, and put a little bit too much oil in the top here for the demonstration, which is why we're having a lot of bleed out. As you do this more and more, you'll learn exactly where you need to stop before you put the cap on. It makes it a little bit easier. Okay, so we're fully plunged in here. We're going to take our bleeder screw and we're going to be careful. Orient that in there correctly so we're not cross threading. And just snug. We're not going to over tighten. We're going to pump. Okay, now that we've done that, we are going to back out the bleeder screw one more time. Now that the oil has emulsified with the air, the volume's going to come up just a little bit, so we're going to do the same thing. Slowly plunge in the piston, and you'll actually start to see little bits of bubbles come out with a little bit of oil. And just clean it as you go. And we're back to the top. We're going to take our bleeder screw again. Careful we don't cross thread. Get the threads going. And tighten down that bleeder screw. We're just going snug. We're not over tightening. Now we're ready to put our shock back together. And it's going to slide our shock spring right over the body. Pull a little tension and put our shock cup back in. Extra step for these shocks. Cap screw. Compress it a few times, feel it nice and smooth. And there you have it, guys. Hey everybody, hope you liked the video. Don't forget to subscribe and leave some comments.